Hello aspirants and welcome again to Legacy IAS Academy. As the economic survey and the budget has been released, we are here with the series on both of them, starting first with the economic survey in a very interesting way. What we will be doing is, as the budget is prepared based on a lot of data which comes out of the economic survey, how we are going to proceed is we are going to take chapter by chapter of the economic survey as to what has been the outcome of the previous financial year, and then synchronize or find out parallels of what is present in this budget for the upcoming year in order to do better than the previous financial year. So we'll start this lecture right away, but remember, the first chapter of the economic survey is generic in nature, which gives the overall outlook of the economy. And from the second chapter onwards, we will draw the parallel of the economic survey and the budget. But the first chapter will be generic, but again very interesting and very helpful, beneficial, because here the majority of the trends of the entire economy would be talked about, which is asked directly in prelims with respect to direct questions on the trends. At the same time, questions in mains as well. So let's get started. So the first chapter that talks about the state of the Indian economy, and the focus point is getting back into the fast lane. Now, what do we understand by getting back into the fast lane? Means India to be the fastest growing economy again, and in a sustainable fashion. Not that we are fastest growing economy in a year, then we come down. No, sustainably keeping India into the fast lane, that is the fastest growing economy of the world. Now, even though we'll be looking at data specifically for India, we cannot look India's data out of context with respect to the world data. So first we start with the global growth trends and outlook of the world. Now, what is the difference between trend and outlook? See, trend is with respect to what has happened so far. Outlook is what do we expect to happen in the future. So the global trend, if we talk about, the growth in the world has been resilient. These words are very important. You should utilize these words in your mains examination, because they basically tell us what has been the case. Resilient means, of course, the growth has not been tremendous, but at the same time, taking into consideration how the uncertain and unstable situation of the world has been, the growth has been resilient. Means it has fought those situations and still ensured that the world's economy grows with respect to a certain level of growth. So it has been resilient. You can see that if you look at 2022 March, June, September, these are quarter-wise data. It was of course high, but if you see this, the slowdown started happening. However, even though you have issues like Ukraine-Russia war, you have issues like the issues in the Middle East where the crude oil prices are fluctuating, the entire global slowdown, a situation wherein it was thought that probably another slowdown worldwide is happening, still the growth has not slid down much, and it has still maintained to some extent stability even with uncertain situation. That is why we call it as the resilient growth which is there. If you talk about the outlooks that we expect in 2025, so we have the trend as well as the outlook here, which we have divided, which the economic survey has divided into the world, the advanced economies, and the emerging market and developing economies. So India comes under EMDEs, right? And this is the advanced economies, like let's say for example your USA. So if you look at it, 1.7, 1.7 and 1.9, there is an increase. Now, emerging market and developing economies have been doing better since a long time as compared to advanced economies. As you can see, 4.4, 4.2, which is more than double the growth rate of advanced economies. However, there is an expectation of slight slowdown in the emerging market and developing economies, which includes India. So India is growing at around 6.4%, and it is estimated to slow down to 6.2%. So we'll see what the government has in store to ensure that we do not slow down, rather maintain our speed and even better it. Now, this slowdown has a lot of reasons which we discuss: uncertainty, political instability, the war that is going on, Israel-Palestine conflict, UK and Russia conflict, so on and so forth. Now, different sectors are also measured with respect to the global terms and Indian terms. So now let us look at with respect to the global manufacturing. it has also stabilized. So we are using words like resilient and stabilized, means there is not much growth, but at the same time downfall is not there. So this is being measured with respect to the global manufacturing PMI, global services PMI, and global composite PMI. What is PMI? That is purchasing managers index. Purchasing managers index is calculated for manufacturing sector separately and service sector separately, and of course you can combine the two to give the composite one. So if you look at it, if you look at the manufacturing sector, it is lowest. It is, let me not confuse you with another red line. If you look at this black line, which is for the manufacturing sector, it is lowest. It is lower than the service sector. So service sector continues to perform better than the manufacturing sector. But since the manufacturing sector is low, the composite one is slightly, of course, below the service sector. So it is the manufacturing sector which needs to take place. They, increase the pace. The service sector, however, is doing well. This is the world scenario. The same scenario is present for India as well, wherein the manufacturing sector is at a lower level and the service sector is better. Then you talk about inflation in the advanced economy versus that in emerging economies. So advanced economies, inflation had peaked over here, which is not a good thing for them, too high inflation. But if you can see, there has been a huge downfall and they are now between 2 to 4%, round about the target that India has set for itself. But if you look at India, India's inflation is on a higher side. Why? Because we do inflation targeting. What is our inflation targeting? 4 plus minus 2%. Are we achieving it? If you can see, we should be within this range, 2 to 4%. But where are we? Above 2%, reaching 8, and then remaining above. We went down slightly, but again got up. Again, we went down slightly here, but again got up. So we are basically at the higher end of the inflation targeting, many times going beyond it. So the government or the Monetary Policy Committee may have to tackle it by basically increasing the policy rate. But if you increase the policy rate, for example, the repo rate, the cost of credit becomes costly. When it becomes costly, the growth may be impacted. So it is a very tricky field wherein MPC have to manage both the inflation as well as the growth. Moving ahead, policy rates. Now, as I said, in policy rates affect inflation. Inflation was very high in the advanced economies, but had gone down. It had, of course, gone down, so they can afford to reduce the policy rate, and they have done that. If you look at India, in India, the inflation is high and is persistently remaining between 6 to 8%. It is not coming down. It is higher. Since it is at a higher side, you might have to increase the policy rate, but we have not done it yet, because if we do that, the growth can get impacted. So the policy rates to maintain inflation kept on going high, but the growth can suffer. So it's stabilized and it may come down to further the growth. We'll see how it boils down. So sorry, this was the Mexico one. Indian one is the blue one over here. So it kept on increasing, and as I said, since a long time it has remained unchanged. This is that unchanged duration from March 2023 to December 2024. Over 1.5 years, it has not changed. Now it remains to be seen whether it goes up to counter inflation or it goes down to increase growth. As it looks from the budget and the economic survey and the finance minister's speech, probably it is going to go down to boost the economic growth. Let's wait and watch. Then comes the bond yield. See, if the interest rate and the policy rate goes up, the investment in bond will be less attractive. So bond yield may also go up to attract people towards the bond market. So these two are directly proportional. Remember that for your prelims examination. So as far as bond yield is concerned, the bond yields have sort of steadily increased in the advanced economies. You can see that, but it is still at a lower level than the ones in the emerging economies. But in the emerging economies, though it is at a higher rate, it is sort of stabilized. Right? This is the trend. And remember, all these graphs that you are seeing in front of you, there is no consecutive growth or consecutive downfall. There are fluctuations, as you can see, because the questions in UPSC are generally based on trends of the last 5 years, last 10 years, last decade, so on and so forth. Moving ahead. Now let's talk about India's growth rate. If you look at India's growth rate, of course, there is expected to be a slowdown. We have not done that well, but overall its growth rate has maintained the average decadal level. Since the last 10 years, whatever the average growth rate was there, we have at least maintained that. So let's break it down. Let's look at agricultural GVA. GVA is gross value added. It has slightly gone down, round about the same, close to 4%. Industrial GVA again sort of gone down, but still close to 6%. It is, as I said, the service sector is still doing well, and it has actually, if you can see, the average growth rate was for the last 10 years was this. The financial year 2025, it is again close to the average growth rate. So if you can see, this growth rate of this financial year, which is in green, is close to the last 10 years average growth rate which is present, and service sector is at the highest, over and above 7% is what it is growing. So this is the GVA of different sectors, this is the combined gross value added, and this is the GDP. Now what is the difference between GVA and GDP? Gross value added. In gross value added, when you let's say infuse the impact of taxes and subsidies, it gives you the GDP. So GDP has nothing but inclusion of the impact of taxes and subsidies. Now, if taxes and subsidies would exactly cancel out each other, then GVA and GDP will be equal. But if taxes and subsidies don't cancel out and there is a positive impact, so GDP will be more. And as you can see, GDP here is slightly more than GVA. So the net impact of subsidies and taxes is on the positive or higher side, thus increasing the GDP, making it more than the GVA. I hope that's clear. Moving on, the economic survey talks about the improving fiscal discipline. What is fiscal discipline? See, fiscal deficit is increasing. It has increased. Now it is estimated to be 4.8% of the GDP. But still, why then we are saying that fiscal discipline is better? Because what is fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit is the gap between the revenue that you are generating and the expenditure that you are having. It is the negative side. But fiscal discipline has increased, means that deficit which is there, it's fine, but the expenditure is happening more on the capital goods, capital expenditure. It is more of the capital expenditure rather than revenue expenditure. So even though we might be borrowing, even though we might have deficit, but the expenditure is happening in a healthier, in a better way. It is happening more as a percentage, more on the capital investment or capital expenditure rather than the revenue expenditure. And there is a continual increase. If you can see, in financial year 21, it was so low, close to 12.5%, which now stands at 21.4%, almost double than not previous year, but almost double as compared to 3 years back. Then you have inflation and its reasons. Now, inflation, if you look at, you will realize that it's the food inflation which is playing a crucial role and pulling the inflation up. So this graph clearly shows that the consumer price index CPI, which is the blue line, then you have the CFPI, that means the food price index. Food price index is the red line, and you can see the red line is the highest. Core inflation is what? Core inflation is your inflation minus food and energy. So it is this core inflation, green, is inflation minus headline inflation minus the inflation which consists of everything minus food and power. So when you eliminate food and power, the inflation is sort of low. But this food inflation is pulling the total inflation up. So you can see that the total inflation, that this is a CPI, is up because of the increase or high level of food inflation. Very important for your exam to know that the food inflation is driving the total inflation up. Now, if you look at the inflation with respect to excluding the top commodities, the tomato, onion, potato, if you exclude that, the inflation is actually going down. But these commodities, these food commodities, is pulling the inflation up. So that is one of the major reasons. Now, if you look at the health of the bank, which was a concern since this present government took power over a decade back, and it has successfully come into power. Since then, since 2015, there have been the issue of NPA. Not that this government created this, NPAs is going on because of the loans given previously as well. But presently, the health of the banks are going better and better. And if you look at the trend of September 22, 23 and 24, you will realize the things are better. Gross non-performing asset has gone down, which is good. Return on equity has gone up, means per equity how much return you are getting has gone up. Return on asset, per unit of asset how much return you are getting, that has also gone up. CRAR has gone up and sort of stabilized. CRAR is credit risk weighted asset basically. So what does it mean is, you might have as a bank some risk, but you have some money to address that risk. So that money which you have to address the weighted risk has gone up and sort of stabilized as compared to previously. So overall the health of the banking sector is well. And last but not the least, the economic survey talks about the reduced unemployment rate, because you can see there has been an clear reduction. If you look at labor force participation rate has consistently gone up. Workforce participation rate has consistently gone up, and the unemployment rate has consistently gone down. What is the difference between labor force and workforce participation rate? Labor force is total people in the labor market. Workforce is actually working force which you are talking about. So labor force is generally going to be higher than work participation rate. Okay. And then unemployment rate, which was on the higher side, if you can see over here, it has also gone down to 3.2. So it was close to 6% to begin with. It was close to 6%. It has almost half to 3.2%. So there has been 50% reduction, which is a very good thing. India was earlier being called as the jobless. India's growth was being called as a jobless growth. Now this reduction will clearly help. So this is an overview of the state of the Indian economy. Now from second chapter onwards, what we will do is we'll look at what the economic survey talks about with respect to the performance of the previous fiscal, and we'll see what the budget has in store for us in order to improve on that. So stay tuned to Legacy IAS Academy channel. Thank you so much.